They ate him on the last season of Farmer Wants a Wife.
That's a show.
Oh, it is.
That's the
best show.
I've seen. Oh, you watch that? Come on,
Okay,
Kelsey.
I have never been like a bachelor or bachelorette person. I'm like, that's just too fake. I can't do it. Me and Olivia, my 4-year-old. It's really PG as far as these dating shows go. It's really PG. Like, and it's really cute because she's like, oh, it's so romantic. Like, she wanted the solo date. It's cute when she's into it. But, like, we're waiting for Fridays on Hulu every single week. Like, Landon got his name from the last season. It was Farmer Landon. Me and Logan watched it together, and we both looked at each other like, Landon. That's it, right there.
Oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
I'm learning so much.
It's so good.
Thanks for joining us on the Clarify podcast, where Kelsey and Ben answer any questions that you, the congregation, have texted in. Do you have questions? Are you confused? Let us clarify.
So the last couple weeks we did some very deep topics, so we decided rather than doing 3 in a row, we'll hit some of the more lighter questions that we had. Still worthwhile questions by all means, just not near as deep as what we've been going.
Yes,
so we wanted
these are fun questions.
Yeah, a little more fun. So starting off the bat with, weren't Adam and Eve technically closely related since Eve was made from part of Adam? Isn't it incest with them reproducing?
That's a fun question. Okay, so the first
Remember that
thing,
this is a family podcast.
Yes, this is a family podcast. So the first thing is that, like, understanding, biology. I'm not going to say anything I shouldn't say, okay? When you have the male DNA and the female DNA, and they come together to make a new person, right? Okay.
Yes.
So that's not what God did here. But I think it's interesting. It's a mystery. It's a mystery that we don't understand because, like, we get in the beginning, God created, right? But we don't get they tell us he spoke, but we don't know, like, scientifically, like, how that all happens, and there's beauty in the fact that there's a mystery. And since we're studying in Ephesians, I'm going to bring up Ephesians 5:29 through 32, and I should have had this looked up. I planned to. It says, "For no one ever hated his own flesh, but nourishes it and cherishes it, just as Christ does the church, because we are members of his body. Therefore, a man shall leave his father and mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. This mystery is profound, and I am saying that it refers to Christ and the church." So, it just occurred to me because this person asked this question, God put Adam to sleep, and he took a rib from Adam to make Eve. And we don't know how God did that, but it was not the same process as what I explained in the beginning, the biological reproduction. It was his primary creation, and how the church comes from Christ. And I've heard that over and over, that marriage is a picture of Christ and the church. But, like, physically, man and woman, like, he did that at the very beginning. Like, how cool is that? Like, Eve came from Adam the same way the church came from Christ. I thought it was a cool picture.
You went a lot deeper than my thought process was going with this one. So kudos.
Thanks.
It's not incest.
Yeah, it's not. Yeah, we should probably have started with that. I just assumed, yes, it is not incest. Sorry, I didn't actually answer the question.
That being said, I'm assuming that this person wasn't really, like, taking this thought all the way down the line, but, like,
yeah,
Adam and Eve had kids.
Yep.
That had to reproduce.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'll just leave it right there. I'll just leave it there. That but it's a different situation. It's not like today when there's 7 billion other people. Mm-hmm. There was no other people.
Well, it's kind of like, the way I like to think about it is similar to, like, sin in the garden. Like, when they had, obviously there wasn't sin in the garden until they sinned, but, like,
very profound.
Back then, it wasn't necessarily like they aren't given the law right away. There wasn't, like, a moral, cultural, or physical dilemma to actually have those kinds of relations with people who are closely related to you. For like, we have Abraham, like Sarah was his half sister, and that just was culturally okay. And then there's Lot's daughters, but granted, they thought the world was ending.
Well, that's a little bit different.
Yeah.
That's a very different scenario.
They thought the world was ending, and there's but like...
You don't want to go into detail on that one?
No, you guys can look that up.
You don't want to do any more of your biology lesson?
I don't want to do that anymore.
Okay.
But like, yeah, today we know that's not okay. Incest is not okay. This isn't incest. That was a really fun conversation, but we can move on now. Okay, I'm going to ask you this next one. God didn't bless Noah's wife and daughters-in-law. This is from Genesis 9:1. So why weren't the women mentioned in God's blessing?
Yeah, it's just a cultural thing. When you look at the Bible, and I was gonna look this up to make sure it was right before we started, and I forgot. So I think this is right. From Eve until Sarah, I don't think women are mentioned, but they're not named. I'd have to double check on that. There might be something around the genealogies or something. But as I'm at least major characters,
I think you might be right.
There is nothing from Eve until Sarah as far as women being even really in the picture. And part of that is the way the Bible is written. I mean, it was a storyline through Genesis. Like, it's traveling through the men because of that culture, the patriarchal society. So because we live in a society that's not patriarchal, we have this question of, well, why weren't the women mentioned? If the women were mentioned, to the original readers, it would have been like, well, why are the women mentioned?
Right.
So it's not because they're not part of the blessing that's given per se. It's a patriarchal society. Just like we have no idea what Noah's wives or daughter-in-laws are even named.
Yeah.
It's
implied. It's implied because in the Western modern world, we have an individual sense of like autonomy and all these things, where even 100 years ago, even in our country, that wasn't as prevalent. Like, It was more like, I am a part of this family unit, and this man is representing our family, and that was okay. Like, people didn't have a like cognitive dissonance about that. That was just the way that it was. And I think that stands true in this. It's an ancient Near Eastern worldview, and so it was implied the women were blessed through this along with the men. And I think part of that is like, so God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply, on and on. And then in verse 8, he says, then God said to Noah and his sons with him, behold, I establish my covenant with you and your offspring after you and every living creature. But like, we read that and like, I just assume, weren't the women part of that covenant? Like, I think that kind of like, if you can read that I establish my covenant with you and your offspring and know that that is collective, that God's saying that to that collective group of people, the women included. Yeah. You can go back to verse 1 and God blessed Noah and his sons and understand that he's blessing their family unit.
Well, it's headship. It's headship of the family. Yeah. So, it's talking about everybody.
Awesome. The next fun question we have today is actually very interesting. Why does Noah choose to send out both a raven and a dove to test the waters and the land? Was there a specific meaning behind this? Why is it noted that only the dove returns? Did the raven also return?
This question came out of an entire paragraph text.
Yeah.
And I was reading it thinking like, man, somebody's really going down the rabbit hole. And I get to the end of the text and it said something about like, I really went down the rabbit hole during this sermon.
They know.
Yeah. So when I was looking this up, there are some theological positions. I'm just like, there's no way. If you Google this, there are people that think like this is signifying. There was something about the fact that the dove is sent out 3 times signifies the Trinity. And I was like, okay, we're getting a little deep here. This is a little bit. I think the logical perspective is honestly just the best. Noah was trying to see if there was land. That's the point, and it's for both of them. Mm-hmm. The one question. Why is it noted only the dove returns? Because the raven probably didn't return. Did the raven return? Doesn't sound like it.
Oh, I think that there's some debate on the original translation of how it's in our English Bibles.
Sure, but from what I saw, it was like it probably didn't.
Because the raven can feed off of floating carcasses and whatever was in the water. It didn't need land.
Right, and they're bigger, they're stronger. Mm-hmm. Our raven's use to semen is based on its line of flight. By knowing the direction it chooses, a sailor may determine where land is located. The most sensible strategy is to release a raven first and then use other birds to determine the depth of the water and the likelihood of a place to land. Now, obviously, Noah's not, steering the ark. It just landed on a mountain. But he's using that. The raven is like that initial test of like, can a bird live
Can it
outside the
immediately
ark?
get to somewhere close?
Right. The dove is more of the immediate diameter of the ark. Like the dove can only fly so far. So if there's a distance that the raven can go or land on a floating carcass or something, like that's like the initial test. That's the rough estimate, and then the dove is the more exact on can we leave this boat.
So this was kind of like a maritime practice.
Yeah,
They would have known to do that.
Yeah, it was like not just with Noah, like going. I don't know how recent of time, but they would send out pigeons or doves or ravens or whatever and find land and find out where the land is and where they can dock their boats and all that fun stuff.
I'm just looking at the clock because I found some of the symbolism fascinating on this.
I'm not saying it's not fascinating. I just think it's above and beyond and not really the point. Do you think it's the point?
Well, she asked, was there a specific meaning behind this? So I'm wondering if, and I think she, obviously from our research, she wasn't the only one to have thought about that.
Sure.
So I agree with you that like the most obvious practical answer is probably going to be your best answer in most things, but I think it is still fun to wonder about the other stuff.
Sure.
Like we were talking about the curiosity. I think that's awesome.
Yeah.
So
agreed.
There were two, I'll just quick read a couple of things that I found that you can think on. These are theories, so don't like hold to anything beyond what the Bible says. But there's a couple different symbols that are debated here. So the flood is a redemption story. So in Hebrew, the word gal for redeem has double meaning. It's avenger and redeemer. And it kind of speaks to a little bit what you're talking about last week of sometimes stuff has to come down for it to be built back up. Yeah. I think that's kind of a similar idea here. And the Lord destroys his enemies and rescues his people. So the raven was an unclean bird. It cleans up the mess, eating death. The raven could symbolize God moving to and fro, searching the garden for Adam and Eve, just before the first blood is shed to atone for their sins and to cover them. So on the other side of the twofold meaning is the dove, which is the clean bird. And that dove searched for a holy remnant of the old world to save and carry into the new, which is the olive branch. So I just thought that was really interesting to ponder and think about.
It's interesting to think about. Yeah. And I'm not saying that there's nothing there per se. I just think that's reading way more into it than
definitely is necessary. It's not necessary.
It's like the argument about Genesis 1 where you've got God the Father creator and you've got the Spirit hovering over the face of the waters and people are like, see, Trinitarianism. Like to a degree maybe, but like, is that the point that Moses was making? No.
No.
Like, does that reflect truth? Maybe, but like, is that the driving point that Moses was going for? No.
I just find that the more that I study the Bible, there's often like it's living in the sense that it's the Word of God, not that like humans can change it over time. God preserves his word, but like the more that I read it, like the more fascinating these little things become. Yeah. I don't want to make that the main story, like you're saying. That's not the point. You can read through this and you don't need that to get where God wants you to go. Right. But I just
there are times when something that seems very insignificant like this are really a point. Like the reason that there was 12 disciples, it does reflect the 12 tribes of Israel. It wasn't just like Jesus couldn't find any more people that day.
And the times in the crucifixion story reflect the times of the sacrifices in the Old Testament. Sure. Like there is significant symbolism to those things.
Right. I just personally don't think that there's that. I think the point was Noah was trying to see if there was land.
Right. And I think that's cool.
One thing I did want to mention, I've had a couple people tell me lately that, wondering if their questions if we got their questions because they haven't heard anything back. I want to go through a couple questions that we have that we're going to answer.
Okay.
I'm not promising when, but
Spoiler alert.
But just to give you a heads up of where we might be going at some point, and I mean it depends on what questions we get in from here on out. But just for people that have had sent in questions a while ago and haven't had them answered yet, here's just a few we've got. So, since sex is meant for procreation and has a byproduct of pleasure, that was one of Andy's points in that sermon. Are we meant to only have sex with the sole intention of creating children in every encounter within the context of marriage? We've got, in the 3 reasons for divorce, abuse was not listed as a reason. Are people supposed to stay in an abusive relationship if there is no sexual immorality or abandonment? Let's see. We've got... Oh, we answered both of those. Man, we are on top of things.
Go team.
This is a good one that we're definitely going to do sometime soon here. How can social media be used as a tool to reach people, creating content that draws people closer to God and to connect them with a local church and in community? We need to do that one at some point. You know what? I think that's enough.
So the point of this is we've gotten your questions.
Yeah.
And we are trying to answer them as expediently as we can.
Yeah, and the more questions, we haven't gotten many questions these last couple of weeks, so continue to send those in during those sermons. We're trying to answer every single one that we get, and if we get too many for the podcast and to answer on stage, then we'll find new methods. We've got some ideas that we don't need to utilize at this point. So, but yeah. We're enjoying doing this. We're enjoying hearing the questions and seeing where all your thoughts are going, and we hope that you're enjoying this too. So
thanks for listening.
We'll catch you next week.